Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Pittsburgh Sports Memories Podcast. My name is Tim Hannon, and I am joined by my always whimsical co host.
Steve Word. Whimsy. I'm full of whimsy and wonder.
You are. This episode, we're going to talk about the first time that the Penguins won the Stanley Cup. That first Stanley Cup for the Penguins comes back in 1991, which is now, gosh, over 30 years ago, Steve. That's hard to believe, isn't it?
Yeah, I was just figuring something that happened in the 90s, and I thought it was only 20 years. I was like, oh, missed 10 years in there. I guess
Yes.
I just didn't figure that decade from 2000 to 2010 didn't happen. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah,
And we're talking about the Stanley Cups that everybody going nuts of, like buying on eBay, drinking out of, or different Stanley Cups.
no, not those. No, I know about those Stanley Cups. Yeah, but no, we're talking about the one that they give out to the champion of the National Hockey League.
Ah, okay.
So, and people do drink
You
out
can
of that
drink.
one too.
Yeah, it's just not as portable. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. So, before we talk about that season, let's give a little bit of context here. The Penguins come into the NHL in 1967, and then like the next 20 years are really just strange. They have this really up and down history. And I think, Steve, people tend to remember the early days of the Pens the way they remember the early days of the Steelers. Like they were just this team that flat out sucked. And then they never went anywhere. But that's not really the case. So here's a good trivia question for you. Between 1970 and 1982, that's a span of 13 seasons. In those 13 seasons, how many times do you think the Penguins made the playoffs?
Oh, probably like half, seven, six,
Nine.
nine. Wow, I was
Yeah.
close.
They make the playoffs nine out of those 13 seasons. That's actually pretty good. So they're not like a terrible team.
But they never won anything in the playoffs.
Right, right.
Yeah.
They do go semi deep a couple of times. One of those times they actually are only two wins away from making it to the Stanley Cup finals. Uh but like you said, they never actually make it to the finals or win anything. They also have some pretty good players during those years. Guys like Sil Apps and Rick Kehoe and Gene Provenovs. They also have a Norris Trophy winner in Randy Carlisle. Still to this day, the only Norris Trophy winner ever to play for the Penguins. That's the award they give for the best defenseman. Uh, so they're not terrible. What they are is, for lack of a better word, unlucky. That season that we said they were two wins away from the cup, that was largely because they had this 20-year-old phenom named Michel Briere, and he dies in a car accident that off season. The Pens famously also become the first team in any major sport to blow a 3-0 series lead in a 7-game playoff series. That happens against the New York Islanders because, of course, it did. Their general manager, Baz Bastien, also killed in a car accident. And then in the middle of all that, the Penguins are forced to declare bankruptcy and they actually padlock the doors of the Civic Arena. So by the time we get to the mid 1980s, this team is under the ownership of the DeBartolo family. We've talked about them before. The attendance is really bad, and the team has drafted this 18-year-old kid from Montreal by the name of Mario Lemieux. And we did an entire episode on how the Penguins ended up with Mario. It took a lot of manipulation, a lot of people sacrificing their jobs. So please go listen to that episode if you haven't already, because it's a wild trip, man, of how the Penguins ended up with Mario. But the mentality in Pittsburgh at that time is like, boy, we've got this once in a generation player. Surely this will turn things around. Because that's what always happens, right? I mean, the Cleveland Cavaliers stunk, and then they get LeBron James, and they're contenders. Heck, even the Penguins years later, when they got Sidney Crosby, had that same kind of trajectory. But that's not what happens here with Mario Lemieux. Now he's great. In fact, even better than people expected, I would say. But the Penguins just can't put any pieces around him, and they essentially waste his first six seasons. The Penguins only make the playoffs once, Steve, in Mario's first 6 years. And you have to remember, this is back when the NHL only had 21 teams, and 16 of them qualified for the playoffs.
Yeah.
So that means that in 5 out of Mario Lemieux's first 6 seasons, the Penguins were literally one of the 5 worst teams in hockey, even though they had the NHL's best player. And things really come to a kind of a head in 1990 because that season there's so much hype headed into that season because the Penguins had made the playoffs the year before and they actually made a pretty deep run. That was the year that they lost to Philly in Game
Yeah.
7, right?
That
And
was another like goal field series with Philadelphia.
right, right. And so you're thinking, okay, that was disappointing, but they're going to build off of that. And so there was a lot of hype headed into the season. The All-Star game was in Pittsburgh that year too. And that was going to be and actually ended up being a showcase for Lemieux. So this is finally the year they put it all together. And the Penguins finished 8 games under 500 and they lose in overtime on the final game of the season when all they needed was a tie to make it to the playoffs. So that's disappointing. They do have some bad luck along the way, mainly the fact that Mario misses a bunch of games with a back injury, but it's a really huge letdown.
I
Given
think their coaching was a little subpar back then too.
it was and
Was
ownership.
that Ubriaco or whatever?
Yeah, their coach at that point was Gene Ubriaco, and ownership decides, you know what, enough is enough. And you have to remember too, at this time that the Bartolos owned 2 sports franchises. They own the Pittsburgh Penguins, and Steve, do you know who the other team was?
Be the San Francisco 49ers.
Yeah. And in 1990,
and they have arguably 2 the best players in both sports.
They do.
Yeah.
And in early night in the winter of 1990, the 49ers had just won their 4th Super Bowl. They're one of the greatest teams of all time. And then the Penguins, despite having this generational talent in Lemieux, can't even make the playoffs. So the Bartolos make a bunch of changes midway through that season, starting with the firing of Gene Ubriaco, who you mentioned. They also fire their general manager, Tony Esposito, and they're both replaced by a guy named Craig Patrick.
I forgot he coached. I forgot he coached for a minute.
Yeah, he actually coached them twice. He's actually became the interim coach. I want to say 7 or 8 years later when they fired Eddie Johnston. So he actually had 2 different stints coaching the Penguins, but like you said, very, very short. He was really general manager more than he was a coach. So Patrick's history, he had been an assistant coach for the Miracle on Ice Olympic team. And then he had been general manager of the Rangers. But I don't know that anybody in Pittsburgh was like, oh, wow, Craig Patrick, this is the guy that's really going to turn things around, right? Patrick does, though, immediately hire somebody who was well known. He makes Hall of Famer Scotty Bowman the director of player development and recruitment. And that was a big get because Bowman had retired at this point to be a broadcaster. And he was out of hockey in terms of like administrative or coaching level. He was out. And they get Bowman to come in to be the director of player development. That was big. Patrick also hires a new head coach, a guy by the name of Bob Johnson. And Johnson's a guy a little older, has a ton of coaching experience. He had even guided the Calgary Flames to the Stanley Cup Finals. And Patrick thinks he'll be a perfect fit for this team. And then Eddie DeBartolo Sr. installs his daughter, Denise DeBartolo York, as team president. So between Patrick Bowman, Badger Bob, and Denise DeBartolo York, like it's a completely revamped set of people running the franchise. So that's good. What about the roster? Obviously, the Penguins have Mario Lemieux. And by this point, I mean, Mario has already been a league MVP. He's already won multiple scoring titles. He had posted an 85 goal season, 85 goals. My goodness.
Yeah.
And he's already by 1990, he's the franchise's all-time leading scorer in 6 seasons.
Yeah.
So he's already the best player in hockey. The team has a defenseman named Paul Coffey, who is coming off of back-to-back 100-point seasons. That was another big get that they were able to pluck him from Edmonton. He played for the Oilers and come over. They have a young second-line center named John Cullen, who had scored 32 goals for them in 1990. And then they have 2 really young wingers named Kevin Stevens and Mark Recchi. Both of those guys also had 30-goal seasons the year before. And they have a franchise goaltender, a guy named Tom Barrasso. So that's a decent nucleus. But remember, that nucleus had gotten them a mere 32 wins in 1990. So Patrick starts making some moves. He trades for Joe Mullen, who was a really good goal scorer and who had won a Stanley Cup and who actually had played for Bob Johnson in Calgary. But Joe Mullen at this point is 33 years old. He looked to be slowing down. That's actually why Calgary dumped him. So that was kind of seen at the time as a risky trade. Patrick signs free agent center Brian Trottier. Now, this was a guy with a resume. He was going to be a Hall of Famer. He had won 4 Stanley Cups with the Islanders. But Brian Trottier is at the very, very end of his career at this point. But
he's a fourth line. Yeah,
he's a fourth liner, right? Like, how effective is he going to be this late into his career? But Patrick's like, well, we can use a guy like this who's been there, done that, knows how to win, can kind of guide the younger guys. So that was a big signing. In the draft, Patrick selects an 18-year-old kid from the Czech Republic named Jaromír Jágr, which was also a risky move at the time because, Steve, there was a lot of, what would you say, geopolitical
yeah. Well, that's why he dropped to what would they pick him, 5th or 6th?
5th, yeah.
Yeah, like he should have really gone first, but people were afraid he wasn't going to be able to come over here because the Czech Republic wouldn't let him.
Early in the season, Patrick also trades Jim Johnson and Chris Dahlquist, 2 defensemen.
Not Jim Johnson. Oh man.
Well, yeah, those guys had been there like forever. I mean, they weren't stars or anything, but they had been there forever. And I think Patrick was like, yeah, they've been here forever. And what have we done with them? Right.
Yeah.
So he trades them away to Minnesota for Peter Taglianetti and Larry Murphy. The other thing that happens is Patrick trades away winger Robbie Brown. And
we lost our celebration there.
Well, and that was controversial at the time because Robbie Brown had scored 50 goals playing on Mario's line, and he was a huge fan favorite. You mentioned the celebration, Steve, that he used to do like this, his arm in like this windmill motion when he scored a goal. And
Ron Hextall loved it. He was a big fan. Big fan of that celebration.
Yeah. Ron Hextall chased him around the ice for doing that. But I loved Robbie Brown. Like when I played street hockey and I scored a goal, which wasn't often, I would mimic that celebration because I loved Robbie Brown.
Would your brother pretend to be Davey Hannon? Because that wouldn't be much of a stretch for him. Davey Hannon scores.
So Patrick clearly wants to remake this roster, and he has, but there's a huge problem heading into the 1990-91 season. Mario Lemieux had to have back surgery in the offseason. We mentioned he had that back injury the year before, which is fine. You're like, okay, good. He's going to have surgery in the offseason. He'll be ready to go. Well, afterwards, he develops a rare bone disease, and it knocks him out for the first 4 months of the season. And you're thinking, that's it, right? Like all these changes in the front office, all these changes on the ice, and the season's over before it even begins. Well, what happens is the Penguins shock everybody by winning a bunch of games while Mario is out. And that's obviously a total team effort, but it's really spurred by the top line, which is centered by John Cullen, and the wingers are Mark Recchi and Kevin Stevens. Meanwhile, the defense is way better with Coffey and Murphy. Jágr is showing a ton of promise as a rookie. The veterans Mullen and Trottier are big contributors, and Tom Barrasso is actually having a pretty stellar season. And Bob Johnson leading the team forward night after night as the head coach. So on January 29th, Mario Lemieux comes back. The Penguins beat the Capitals in overtime at the Civic Arena. And at this point, I mean, there's real, genuine excitement in Pittsburgh because that win makes the team 28-21-3 on the season. It puts them in second place in the Patrick division, just 1 point behind the first place Rangers. So you're thinking, if they could be 1 point out of first place without Mario Lemieux, imagine what the team could do with Mario Lemieux. Like the sky is the limit at this point, right? Right?
You would think.
So what happens next is that the Penguins proceed to only win 4 out of their next 14 games. At this point, we're in March. The regular season's almost over. The Penguins are hovering around 500, and their playoff hopes are kind of on life support. So it's like, here we go again with this franchise. Just when something good seems to be happening, the bottom falls out. And Craig Patrick decides he's got to act. right? He's got to do something to save the season. So on March 4th, Patrick pulls off arguably the biggest blockbuster trade, not only in the history of the Penguins, I'd say, Steve, in the history of Pittsburgh sports. He sends John Cullen and defenseman Zarley Zalapsky to the Hartford Whalers for center Ron Francis, defenseman Alf Samuelson, and defenseman Grant Jennings. And that move sends absolute shockwaves through Pittsburgh. And this is one of those things where you have to put yourself in the time period, because now you look back on that and people remember that as the greatest trade ever. And we fleeced Hartford to get the nucleus of 2 Stanley Cup winners. But at the time, people were pretty upset about that. I mean, John Cullen, as we already mentioned,
piece. Yeah, he was a key piece of the season. I mean, he's a good player.
Yeah, and he's having a monster season. If you go back and look at the league's leading scorers at the time of that trade, you have a top 5 that consists of Wayne Gretzky, Brett Hull, Steve Yzerman, and John Cullen. Like it's literally John Cullen's up there with Gretzky, Hull, and Yzerman. And if not for John Cullen, the season would have been over back in October, and you're going to trade him away. And for who? I mean, Ron Francis at this point was a 3-time All-Star, but he played for Hartford. So who cares? And then who the hell is Alf Samuelson? And I remember
Grant Jennings even is like another tough guy kind of defenseman. So
yeah. And I remember thinking at the time, like, this just reeks of desperation. Like, they were in a slump. I get it, but they could have pulled themselves out of it. And they sure as heck aren't going to do it without their leading scorer that you just traded away. And I also really like John Cullen, Steve. I got to meet him at Allegheny Center Mall, and he was a super nice guy. And he signed my street hockey stick, which I still have, by the way, in my basement.
He didn't run out without you signing him.
That's a different story that we'll save for another podcast. But yes, somebody else did that. A different player
on that team, even I think.
On that team, yes.
Yeah.
But I still have that hockey stick in my basement with John Cullen's autograph on it. And I was really sad to see him go. And I just thought Craig Patrick had made a huge mistake. Well, anyway, as we all know by now, 15-year-old me was wrong and Craig Patrick was right. Francis turns out to be a really good two-way player that the Penguins sorely needed. And then Alf Samuelson provides a grit that the team just didn't have. And that trade pays off almost immediately, because the Penguins go on a 7-game unbeaten streak. And they're once again neck and neck with the Rangers in the Patrick division. So on March 21st, the Rangers come to the Civic Arena. And at this point, there's only 5 games left in the regular season. And the Penguins have a chance to overtake New York and win their first ever division title. Now, you probably wouldn't think this is a big deal today. Like, okay, who cares what seed you are in the playoffs? If you're the division champion or the 2 seed, what difference does it make? But at the time, it was massive because the Penguins had never won anything at all. So just even being able to hang a banner from your roof that said 1991 Patrick Division Champions was more than you could have ever done in the past. And to this day, I honestly cannot remember a regular season game being as anticipated as this one was. The only other time I can remember something coming close, Steve, was that game against Toronto when Mario made his comeback years later. That's the only other regular season game I can remember people being as excited for. And that game against the Rangers, it's a great back and forth game. It goes into overtime. And as they start overtime, that's where the Penguins, this moribund franchise with a history of terrible luck, finally have luck turn in their favor.
Here's Stevens, though, down the right wing of the Rangers end. Shoots it wide of the goal. Van Beesbroek was split. It went in. Van Beesbroek went up his glove and it went in. Penguins win the game, I believe. It went off the glove of Van Beesbroek. The Penguins win 5-4.
So that win propels the Penguins to a Patrick Division title. And like we said, that meant something at the time. So they win the Patrick Division. They're going into the playoffs as the division champions. Their first round opponent is the New Jersey Devils, who are not a very good team in 1991. The Devils barely squeeze into the playoffs. They have an under 500 record. Like we said, back then, you didn't have to be super good to make the playoffs. They had also just recently fired their head coach. So, you match that up against the fact that the Penguins had home ice advantage and all this momentum. This should just be a short series, right? Of course,
Nope.
that's not what happens.
Yeah.
New Jersey wins game 1, which is going to become a trend. And then they end up taking 3 out of the first 5 games of the series. And I remember watching those games. It was so frustrating because the Penguins were this high flying goal scoring team. And against New Jersey, they just kept dumping the puck into their end because they couldn't get any rhythm going. They just looked flat. They looked totally stymied by New Jersey's defense. And at this point, so now New Jersey has a 3-2 lead in the series. Game 6 is in New Jersey, and the Devils can eliminate the Penguins with a win, which is just going to be like such a disastrous end to what was such a promising season. And to make matters worse, Tom Barrasso is hurt, and the Penguins have to start their backup goaltender, a guy named Frank Pietrangelo.
I remember him.
You really never wanted to be in a situation where Frank Pietrangelo had to save your season, but that's where they're in game 6. And it's a really tight game. The Penguins have a 1-goal lead when this happens.
Lane left point. Fetisov shoots it, deflected right in. Pietrangelo save, rebound. Stastny stopped by Pietrangelo. I don't believe that save. Neither does Peter Stastny.
That play today is simply known as the save. It's legendary in Pittsburgh sports lore. I'm surprised we have not erected a statue of it yet, Steve. It's one of those plays like you could watch it 1,000 times, and every time, even though you know it's going to happen, it feels like Stastny's going to score.
Yeah. And they were leading, right? Were they leading?
They were up by 1, and
Yeah.
the Penguins end up winning that game by guess how many goals, Steve?
1
goal.
Yeah.
So that's huge. It staves off elimination. And then Pietrangelo comes back at home in game 7 and actually shuts out New Jersey to win the series. The other thing about that, it's the first time in franchise history that the Penguins have won a game 7.
Yikes.
As they head into that second round, they're starting to gain confidence. And a lot of that comes from Badger Bob. Mario Lemieux cites Bob Johnson as the reason the team feels like they can win no matter what the situation. So Mario is really feeling like Bob Johnson is leading this team forward. The opponent in the second round is a team who up to this point, the Penguins have never faced in the playoffs. It's a team called the Washington Capitals.
Well, I wonder what's going to happen in this series.
And I wonder if we'll ever see them again in the playoffs, Steve.
Yeah, really.
The Penguins come out sluggish and they drop game 1. As we said, this is going to be a trend. And then game 2 turns into a shootout. The immortal Randy Gillen scores a late goal for the Penguins to tie the game 6-6.
Jeez.
I miss this era of wide open hockey. And then Randy Gillen, like we said, you need like these unsung heroes.
Yeah.
And then the game goes into overtime. And that's huge because if Washington gets the next goal at this point, then they've just taken the first 2 games of the series at Pittsburgh.
Yeah, that's going to be tough to come back from.
Yep. So let's see what happens next in overtime.
Brady to the left wing, gets around a third man. Iafrate goes against the fourth, but he can't beat him. And Mullen turns in the counterattack. Penguins hurrying up. They got a man open left wing as Stevens. Francis has it. He goes to Stevens. He's there. A shot. Hey! Shoots and scores! Kevin Stevens wins it in overtime.
The Penguins win that game in overtime, and then they dominate in games 3, 4, and 5 as well. None of those games are particularly close. And Barrasso says later that the Capitals never adjusted to the Penguins' fast-paced style of play. He said the Capitals kept trying to do dump and chase, and that kept creating all these 2-on-1s. That overtime goal there that you heard was a 2-on-1.
Yeah.
So that ends up being a short series. The Penguins eliminate the Capitals. Like we said, maybe that'll be a trend too. And the Penguins advance to the Wales Conference Finals. So the conference finals is when stuff kind of starts to get real because the Penguins' opponent in that series is the Boston Bruins, who are
does it have our favorite head coach? Are we gonna?
Oh yeah, we're going to talk about him. Don't worry. We're going to talk about him. The Bruins at this point are the defending Wales Conference champions, and they had played in 2 of the previous 3 Stanley Cup finals. So they're a good team. They have these powerhouse stars like Ray Bourque and Craig Janney and Cam Neely. Boston has some superstars. They have a really good goaltender too named Andy Moog. The other thing hurting the Penguins is that they don't have Paul Coffey. He had taken a stick to the eye early in the playoffs, and then he eventually came back wearing this big visor to protect his eyes. And then he takes a puck to the jaw. So he's not playing. The series opens at the Boston Garden, a place where the Penguins are 6-44 all time.
Wow. It's better whatever the record was in the Spectrum.
And the Spectrum, yeah, the Spectrum was much worse in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
The Bruins crushed the Penguins in game 1, but just like all the other series, the Penguins are resilient in game 2. Mario scores a late goal, which is seemingly going to give the Penguins the win. But then a terrible call from referee Dan Marowelli awards Boston with a 5-on-3 power play in the final minutes. And Boston ends up scoring on that to send the game into overtime. And then Boston wins it in overtime. So now they have a 2-0 lead in the series. And the Penguins are pretty upset about how that went, particularly Boston native Kevin Stevens, who says, quote,
yeah.
Well, he says, quote, everything about that game was nonsense. Only he doesn't say nonsense. And then after that game, a bunch of reporters are in the locker room asking questions, and Stevens tells them, quote, we're going to win 4 straight. Write it. We're going to win 4 straight. And Stevens says later, he says, quote, I was just really, really mad, so bleeping frustrated. I didn't say it to fire us up. I just said it because I was angry and because I knew we were going to win anyway. So what's the difference?
Oh, wow.
2 things change after that game. Number one is that the Penguins offense shifts into another gear, and Stevens definitely backs up his words with some stellar play. Phil Bourque says that Stevens went into, quote, beast mode after that. But the real key is that Mario just takes over like he typically did in those days. Stevens even said about his guarantee, he said, I knew we were going to win because we had Mario. I still remember the look on his face after that second game. When you've got the best player who's ever lived on your side, it makes it a little easier to say something like that. And so in game 3 back at the Civic Arena, there's a play where the Bruins defenseman is bringing the puck out of his own zone. It's a very standard, typical, they've just made a line change. Here we go. The defenseman's bringing the puck out of his zone. And Mario just skates up to the guy, takes it right off of him, and then skates in all alone on Andy Moog. Here is what that sounded like. And just listen to the roof of the arena like blow off here.
Peels back into his own end and will leave the puck now for Gary Galley. Galley lost it to Lemieux. Lemieux trying to get around and does. He walks in alone on Moog, makes a little move. He shoots and scores! Mario Lemieux beats Moog like a rented mule.
The second thing that happens after that game 2 was that the Penguins really clamped down on defense, which is not their forte necessarily. Barrasso shuts down the Bruins in game 3 and game 4. He allows only 1 goal in each of those games. But the other thing that happens is that the Penguins assign Ulf Samuelsson to shadow Cam Neely. And this causes massive amounts of controversy in Boston because there's a play in game 3 where Neely, who is probably Boston's best player, he's skating up the ice and Ulf is skating the opposite direction, and those two collide. And Samuelson's knee catches Neely's leg, and eventually Cam Neely has to leave the game. And the Bruins are furious. They think it was an intentional cheap shot, like Ulf Samuelsson basically kneed him in the thigh and knocked him out of the game. Boston is coached by a gentleman who Steve referred to earlier. His name is Mike Milbury, and who, for lack of a better word, is a meathead. I mean, I don't know how else to describe
They
Mike
go into the
Milbury.
stands that one time in New York and beat a guy with his own shoes.
That's exactly right. That's who Mike Milbury is. And when that happened, Milbury picks up a stick on the bench and he keeps slamming it against the glass until the stick breaks in half. Like, this is the head coach, just like throwing a temper tantrum on the bench. And then so that's in the moment. You can certainly get the emotions of the moment. But then, like, there's a couple of days between game 3 and game 4. And for game 4, Milbury dresses a bunch of goons for the next game. It's 4 guys who have a combined 7 goals on the season and who haven't really been playing in the playoff games. He dresses those guys with the sole intention of exacting revenge on Ulf. And he even talks about that in the media. He's like, well, we need to have a response. And then Boston loses 4-1. It's like so
Well,
stupid.
there's your response. Yeah.
Well, it's just that, again, like that meathead hockey mentality of like goals and points don't matter. What matters is that, we sent a message and we exerted ourselves physically and it's a stupid alpha
If it
male.
would lead the goals, then I'd agree with you.
Yeah. So now the series is tied. And meanwhile, Cam Neely is back. So we're going to talk about this a little bit more later, but he's back. He has a bruise on his thigh, which I'm sure hurt. I'm sure means he's not necessarily 100%, but essentially he's fine. And there's this narrative in Boston that not only knocked him out of that series, but like ruined his career with that cheap shot. And it's completely false, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So the Penguins even the series with 2 wins in Pittsburgh. It goes back to Boston for game 5. And Cam Neely's obsessed with Ulf Samuelsson, and he gets called for multiple penalties. And Cam Neely was a goal scorer. He was not a guy that took a lot of penalties. And those penalties turn into Penguin power play goals, and the Penguins win 7-2. And man, I'd love to know what the rent was for the space that the Penguins had inside the heads of Milbury and Neely. Because whatever it was a great deal, man. I mean, that's like Joey Porter level.
Yeah.
Messing with the heads of the opponents there. So the Penguins win game 5. They now have an opportunity to do something truly historic back at the Civic Arena. They can punch their ticket to their first ever Stanley Cup Finals with a win in game 6. And game 6 is a lot closer than the previous 3 games. It goes back and forth. But Mark Recchi scores a late goal in the 3rd period to break a 3-3 tie. Mario adds an empty netter. And the Penguins are going dancing with Lord Stanley. It's just an amazing comeback after being down 2-0. And then Stevens predicting that they would win 4 straight, and then they go out and they win 4 straight. So one other note for game 6, Cam Neely, who is still only concerned about avenging his honor at this point, tries to
my honor, sir.
He tries to check Ulf Samuelsson along the boards, but Ulf ducks, and then Neely's left thigh hits the boards, and it really hurts him. In fact, Cam Neely ends up missing most of the next season, the 1991-92 season, because of that play. And again, the narrative is that Ulf hurt Cam Neely and his whole career got sidetracked. Cam Neely was this great superstar player, going to be a Hall of Famer and the best player in the league. And the Bruins were in the Stanley Cup Finals every year. And then this 30 player, Ulf Samuelsson, cheap shotted him and ruined his career. But in reality, the injury that quote unquote ruined Cam Neely was his left thigh. And what that hit back in game 3 that everybody was upset about, that was on his right thigh. Cam Neely sort of did all that to himself. And any attempt to blame Ulf is just utter nonsense from the Boston fans. But years later, Steve, that's what you always hear. That's always the narrative.
Yeah, the narrative is, Ulf Samuelsson, at least from Mike Milbury, at least.
And you know what? If you don't believe me that whole narrative is a lie, let's hear directly from Cam Neely himself.
The hit that created all the problems with my left thigh and then my left knee wasn't the one that was shown. It was a different hit. I actually went to go hit him in the corner, and he ducked. And as he was ducking, my thigh went into his knee, and I was going at a pretty good pace. So
even he admits it. Yeah.
Yep. So anyway, that always annoys me that's the narrative. And that needs to be the record needs to be set straight on that. So now that we've done that, let's talk about the Stanley Cup Finals that the Penguins have now advanced to. And one thing I remember distinctly at this time, obviously, we as fans were very excited. And one of our teachers in school, Steve and I went to the same high school. One of our teachers, a guy named Mr. Collins, he was a Canadian, and he knew a ton about hockey. And I always loved to talk hockey with him because he was very knowledgeable about the sport. And when we were in the conference finals, I remember Mr. Collins saying, it would certainly be a surprise if they were able to beat Boston. That's going to be an uphill climb. But even if they somehow beat Boston, there's just no way that they're going to beat the Oilers. And the context there was the Edmonton Oilers were the greatest team of that era. We talked before about the 49ers. That was like the 49ers of the NHL.
They had one. They still had Gretzky at that point. Yeah.
They did not, but
the Gretzky was gone by then?
Yeah. So they had won 5 of the previous 7 Stanley Cups, and yeah, they had traded away Gretzky by that point. But they were still winning cups. They had won the cup the year before with Mark Messier leading the way. So while they didn't have Gretzky, they were still a dominant force.
They substituted one Hall of Famer for another.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And in 1991, they're right back in the Campbell Conference Finals, about to play for the cup yet again. And their opponent is not the Flames or the Blackhawks or any of the other powerhouse teams from that era in that conference. They're playing against the Minnesota North Stars. So let's talk about that franchise here for a moment. They actually came into the league the same year as the Penguins, and like the Penguins, never really have a lot of success. In 1991, they finished the regular season with a record of 27-39. If you're doing the math, that's 12 games under 500. It's the fifth worst record in hockey. Like, they suck. 27-39 is a bad hockey team. But lucky for the North Stars, they play in a division called the Norris Division, which is not a great division. In fact, this is interesting, Steve. I never knew this. At this point, no team from the Norris Division had ever made it to the Stanley Cup Finals. And like, that was kind of fluky, but like, whatever. I mean, so what? They're in the playoffs. They'll just get blown out pretty quickly, right? Well, to the absolute shock of everybody, the North Stars get hot. They win their first two playoff series. And then in the conference finals against the almighty dynasty of the Edmonton Oilers, the North Stars win that series handily, 4-1.
Jeez.
So now, instead of playing the Oilers in the Stanley Cup Finals, the Penguins are going to play this Cinderella Minnesota North Stars team, which was just a surprise to everybody. So the series opens in Pittsburgh, and the Penguins drop game one. So now they've lost game one of every series in the playoffs. Congrats. That completes their rewards card.
Yeah.
They get a free medium soft drink at Wendy's or whatever.
Tim Hortons if they're in Canada.
Yeah, there you go. So game two is a big deal because obviously the Penguins had come back from 2 games down against Boston, but that was when the first 2 games were in Boston. You can't drop the first 2 games at home and expect to win the series. The Penguins do get an emotional lift in game 2 with the return of Paul Coffey, wearing a ton of stuff around his face at this point. And they jump out to an early 2-0 lead. Bob Erie gets a big shorthanded goal. But Mike Modano, the Hall of Famer for Minnesota, he scores a goal in the second period to cut the lead to 1. And now the Penguins need a moment. They need something that's really going to turn this series. And who better to provide that moment than this guy?
Here's Lemieux. The center penalty coming up. Look at Lemieux. Oh, my heavens. What a goal. What a move. Lemieux. Oh, baby.
That's now an iconic goal, right? And we've talked about that before. Like, I think when they built the statue of Mario Lemieux, a lot of people were shocked that wasn't what they built the statue from. Because that's like the signature Mario Lemieux goal. I mean, he skates through the entire Minnesota defense. There's 2 defensemen. Like, how do you get through 2 defensemen?
Yeah.
And
then
then
Mario, yeah.
Yeah. And then, one of the big reasons that Minnesota had made it this far was their goaltender was a guy named John Casey, who was just playing lights out against everybody else. And Mario just makes him look silly on that play and would continue to make him look silly for the rest of the series. So the Penguins win game 2. They go to Bloomington for game 3. And all the talk is how the North Stars are just so dominant at home. In fact, they've only lost 2 home games since January at this point. So you just can't beat them at home. But the Penguins have a bigger problem because literally right before the game starts, Mario has severe back spasms and he can't play. And Minnesota ends up winning the game. And that was shocking because literally he was like out there for the pregame skate and he had these really bad spasms and they had to like scratch him like literally like 5 minutes before the game started. And I think that really sucked the life out of the Pens, and and now Minnesota has a 2-1 lead in the series. And it's at this point that the local media in Minnesota does something kind of odd. They do this story about like, what if the North Stars win? And they go to the Minnesota players and they give these interviews for this story. The players do, where they talk about like going to the White House. They talk about like the size of their rings. There's even
they talk about the parade or
yeah, I was
something?
going to say there's even something leaked about the parade route. And I can certainly get the media doing the story, maybe. But I guess, Steve, why would the players not just, give like the vanilla, like, hey, way too early to talk about that. It's a long series.
Yeah.
Like, why would you give in and talk about like, oh yeah, it'd be great to meet the president and
I want to meet
why?
President Bush. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, why would you do that? I don't
Gulf
know.
War and everything. Yeah. I don't know. Trying to think what else. What's the Gulf? Yeah, this was the Gulf
That
War
was the
year.
year, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Maybe
So
we'll get to meet Whitney Houston. I don't know. Yeah, it's an odd. I do remember them planning the parade after, like, little premature parade celebration, but it happens
Yeah.
to the best of us, I guess.
Yeah, and that's something where, not a smart move by the team in general, but like when you have the players like quotes in the
Yeah.
newspaper, remember the newspaper?
Well, I mean, Kevin Stevens, yeah. Kevin Stevens did kind of the same thing, kind of.
That's fair. I mean, but it really causes a lot of it's a big controversy at the time.
Yeah, it was, because I know they commented on in Game 6.
Right.
I think I remember the Steigerwald or one of them comments about, oh, I wonder the parade,
Yeah.
like they say something kind of smarmy about it.
Yeah, people were mad, including the Penguins players, and I just it just boggles my mind. I mean, I get that athletes in 1991 aren't as media savvy as they are today, but still, I mean, the only thing I'll say, the general managers of the North Stars at this time is a guy named Bobby Clark.
Oh,
And
jeez, that
yeah.
Bobby Clark.
That Bobby Clark. And Bobby
Oh, wow.
Clark liked to build teams that were high on physicality and low on intelligence. And I mean, he did. I mean, look at all those Flyers teams. Scott
he knew how
Hartnell.
to hack a Russian guy's ankle pretty good. Of course, he famously broke Valery Kalamov's ankle in a Summit Series in the 70s.
Well, and that's the kind of teams he put together in Philadelphia all those years later too. He had been the general manager in Philadelphia in the 80s when they had Ron Hextall chasing people around. He was a general manager later when, they had guys like Scott Hartnell throwing his glove at a guy on a breakaway to try to stop him. You know what I mean? It was a lot of Mike Milbury kind of meatheads.
Yeah.
And that's what Bobby Clark liked to stack his team with. And if you're going to go up to guys like that and be like, hey, what do you think about meeting the president? Maybe they're not going to think to themselves, boy, maybe this is a question I just shouldn't answer right now. Or just say, hey, man, it's a long series. This team's really good. We got to play, we're not done yet. Like, whatever.
It's only 2 games to 1. Like, if it would have been 3 games to 1, then maybe I could have seen it, but 2 games to 1?
Yeah, that
seems odd.
It was very odd. And the Penguins read all this. And like you said, Steve, they're ticked off. Like, it's not a 3-game series. It's a 7-game series. North Stars haven't won anything. So the Penguins are really fired up for Game 4. Mario Lemieux is back, and the North Stars have just made the Penguins mad. So 58 seconds into Game 4, this happens.
Now play to the right wing corner, and Stevens has it again. He has Francis open, comes out there and shoots himself. He scores! The Penguins take a 1-0 lead. Kevin Stevens and Carl Arnold Slick from Turtle Creek.
What was John Casey doing there? That's like, that was terrible. That was just bad goaltending. He just like stood there and watched it go in. And like,
yeah,
should I close my legs? Should I, like, he's not a butterfly goalie, obviously.
Yeah, John Casey starting to get psyched out at this point. That's 58 seconds into the game. 98 seconds later, this happens.
Back up ice, picked up by Stevens. He's got a puck now. He's got the shoot. Stop made. Rebound score. The Penguins have scored again. Ronnie Francis makes it 2-0.
So now it's 2-0. And then 22 seconds after that.
Another shot. That's Wyatt. Rebound. Score. It's 3-0. Mario Lemieux at the side of the net.
And this game isn't 3 minutes old. And you can't tell us, Mr. Neal, you thought it was going to start like this.
And that's in Minnesota, too.
Yep.
Where they're supposedly invincible.
Right. I mean, in the old Met Center, people have barely even gotten their seats yet. And it's 3-0 Pittsburgh. What I remember distinctly about watching this game, Steve, was that my dad missed all of that simply because he was taking our dog outside. Like, the dog was like standing at the door, had to go to the bathroom, and he's like, okay, they just dropped the puck. Yeah, I'll be right back. And I remember I ran outside to tell him it was 3-0, and he didn't believe me. He thought I was just I thought, yeah, he just thought I was messing with him because it was like, I just came out for a couple minutes to let the dog out. How's it 3-0 already? So, yeah, clearly the Penguins were angry. Clearly the Penguins wanted to send a message. However, I will say that the problem with scoring that many goals that early is it does make it easy to kind of take your foot off the gas pedal. And sure enough, Minnesota does come back and they make it a 1-goal game. And then with about 7 minutes left in the game, with the Penguins still clinging to that 1-goal lead, Troy Loney high sticks Mark Tenorti in the face, and he gets called for a 5-minute major. And this is not like the Dan Maruelli call back in the Boston series.
Yeah.
This is a good call because and like Troy Loney didn't do it on purpose. It wasn't dirty. It was accidental. And Mark Tenorti was a huge jagoff. But Loney still caught him square in the face, and Tenorti's bleeding and everything. Like, it's an automatic 5-minute penalty. You have to call it. So right here is what many people consider the single most important moment of this entire series. The Penguins are leading by 1. The North Stars are going to have a power play for essentially the rest of the game here with 7 minutes left. And Minnesota's two biggest strengths of that playoff run was, number one, their home crowd that we mentioned, right? They couldn't lose at home, but also their power play. Their power play was what had spurred them to all these upset victories. And now they've got a 5-minute, and it was one of those, Steve, it was one of those like 5-minute score as many goals as you can power plays.
Yeah, it's a major. Yeah.
Yeah. And their crowd's going absolutely ballistic. I mean, this is the point. They just need 1 goal to send it into overtime. But they could get more than 1. But the Penguins, this offensive-minded, finesse scoring first Penguins team, smothers the Minnesota power play. Guess how many shots the North Stars get on their extended power play, Steve?
1.
Less.
0. Wow.
Yeah.
Unless you can go into negatives. -1.
They get 0 shots. They don't even get a shot off.
Wow.
So
I wonder what they were. I mean, they must have like really, been frustrated by the end of that. I mean,
yeah, talk about just crushing the soul.
Like, I could see like the
opponent.
first minute or two, you're like, oh well, but then after that, it kind of like one of those things where it snowballs when you don't score or have a shot for like the first minute or two. Then it like you keep like the pressure keeps like building.
Yep.
So.
Yeah. So the Penguins win that game. They go back to Pittsburgh and they win game 5 after scoring 4 goals in the first period. Again, they get out to an early lead. And that sets up game 6 back at Minnesota in this just unbelievable scenario. This franchise that had all these dreadful moments, all these terrible things happen to them, who never once gave its fans anything to celebrate, are now on the precipice of what most people never thought was even possible. They could win a championship. The North Stars have their backs against the wall. So you think, okay, game 6 in Minnesota, must win for the North Stars. It's going to be a really tight game. Ulf Samuelsson, who you mentioned, Steve, didn't score a lot of goals. He gets a power play goal a couple minutes into the game. But then later in the first period, the North Stars have a power play of their own. So it's 1-0 Penguins. The North Stars are on a power play. They have a chance to tie this thing up. And here's what happens on the Minnesota power play.
Cagnetti got it around the wood, but not out. Brian Glenn leaves it in the corner. Murphy should be able to get the puck out. He has it. And nice play by Murphy to go to the near side. Ahead for Lemieux. Takes the puck in stride against the man. Fellows cuts in on goal. Makes a little move. Hey! Shoots and scores! He beat Casey like a rented mule. And the Penguins lead 2-0.
John Casey had no answer for Mario Lemieux, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, just like whatever fight Minnesota had left, Mario just sucks it out of them right there. I mean, that's it. You can't, at that point, it's like, okay, this guy's just better than us. Like, we can't beat him, right?
Yeah.
So after that, the route is on. The Penguins score 8 unanswered goals. And, of all the championships that we've witnessed, Steve, this one, it was so great. It was such a great final 10 minutes or so, because like you knew it was over. The Penguins were going to be champions. You could just sit back and enjoy the ride. It wasn't coming down to the final minutes and the Ben Roethlisberger driving against
Yeah.
the Cardinals. It was just like, okay, it's over. We won.
No Flurry
great.
making a save with
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, even the other Stanley Cups, like it came down to like the Penguins had to get an empty net goal at the end to ice it. This is like 8-0. I mean, it's not even within the realm of possibility that anything's going to happen. So here's what the final seconds sounded like.
Stevens shoots it back to center with 5, 4, 3. Time runs out. The Stanley Cup has come to the city of Pittsburgh. The 1991 Stanley Cup champions, the Pittsburgh Penguins.
So that's it. The Penguins are Stanley Cup champions. Mario Lemieux wins the Conn Smythe Trophy as the playoff MVP. He finally fulfills his destiny. He's now the indisputable greatest player on the planet. Bob Johnson, after all those years in coaching, he gets a Stanley Cup. Craig Patrick and that management team he built, it all comes together for a title. To this day, it's still one of the most talented teams in the history of Pittsburgh sports. Listen to this stat, Steve. Of the top 20 scorers in NHL history, 6 of them were teammates on the 1991 Penguins.
Well, when you got Ronnie Franchise as your second team center, you're going to be okay.
Yes.
And then you got Yager in there and Joey Mullen and
Yeah. I mean, just an
the immortal
overflow.
Jimmy Pack,
Just an overflow of talent there. And the last thing I'll say too is this championship, I think it meant so much to the city, because
Pittsburgh is is one of the few cities, I think, that has a Stanley Cup and a Super Bowl and a World Series. I think we're one of the few. And I think it's us, Tampa, right? And no, Tampa's never won a World Series, have they?
No.
So
that would be
definitely us in
stat.
New York,
Yeah.
Chicago,
yeah,
and I Toronto maybe.
That would be an interesting statistic to look up for sure.
Yeah, I've heard it before because I know there aren't many cities that have that combination. Philadelphia, I guess Philadelphia now has that.
Yeah, true. But I think this one also meant so much just because, like we talked about in previous episodes, how rough the 1980s were on the city, right?
Oh,
like that was like the steel mill closures, the mass exodus of people. I mean, like we all knew people or had friends or family that left the city, right, Steve? I mean, it was a bad time for Pittsburgh.
Yeah, it was a rough time. I remember my dad bounced around between a lot of jobs. I mean, he was in the medical field and still was, tough there, closing hospitals and stuff. And it wasn't easy for Pittsburgh, and it really was kind of like a short, brief respite because really nobody won anything until 2004. Yeah, the Steelers didn't win until 2004, 2005. The Penguins kind of won these two, and that was it. That was really it from 1979 to 2004, and then we kind of had that mini, like we did a whole podcast on the golden age. That
right. We had like a second 70s.
Yeah. This was kind of like the oasis in the middle of a championship desert.
That's very true. Yeah.
And I was young. I remember thinking when they won those two, I was like, oh, this is going to happen every year. I didn't realize that, this didn't happen every year.
Yeah.
And I was in junior high at that point. So I don't know if we were quite in the same school yet till maybe the year after.
And I think that, so there was that like groundswell of pride in the 70s. Like people just reveled in the fact that
people became Penguins fans. This made people Penguins fans too. Like the Penguins were kind of like, maybe there's the Steelers and the Pirates, and then maybe the Penguins, like kind of down there.
But yeah, that's true. Also, it really,
because I remember going out and getting like, I didn't know hardly anything about hockey except, people, we started playing it. Like I remember in junior high playing it every day at gym class, and that was, probably because of the Penguins more than anything. And I used to have a shirt that said Wales Conference Championship on it. I don't know where that went.
Yeah, and like it's like in the 70s you had the Steelers and Pirates winning championships, and I think people were so proud of like Pittsburgh, nationally Pittsburgh was just seen as this smoky steel town that nobody wanted to go to. And then it brought all this national pride. And then you had this entire decade of bad economy, people leaving, and then all the sports teams just went into the gutter. And so for this team to come out and bring another championship back to the city, I just think it meant a ton to people. And I think you saw that with what happened at the airport. So
this is incredible. Yeah.
yeah, a throng of 40,000 people flood Greater Pitt at 3:00 in the morning to greet the Penguins as their plane lands.
Yeah, I think they had to shut down the airport, didn't they?
Yeah.
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 Do you have the video of this at all? No?
Well, I'll post a link to that on our website, but you'll never see something like that again.
Well,
you just never will. They
because
won't.
of security. Yeah.
They wouldn't even allow it today, right?
Well, the second one, remember, they told people don't come to the airport.
Correct. I think what happened at this one, somebody died. I think somebody tried to climb up on a wall or something to see better and fell.
But yeah, and then people, like, once the rumors spread, and this is back before cell phones,
right? Yeah,
like this is just word of mouth.
Yes,
word of mouth.
That's what I'm saying. There
was no Facebook, there was no Twitter. It was just word of mouth.
Even Steve, even with Facebook and Twitter, could you get 40,000 people to show up for something at 3:00 in the morning? It would be hard enough to get 30,000 people to show, or 40,000 people to show up for
at like 2 in the afternoon. Yeah.
For something you sold tickets to months in advance.
Yeah.
Much less, like you said, impromptu, 3:00 in the morning. And yeah, that's a really good point that I never thought of, Steve. You're right. There was no social media like, hey, we're going to the airport. Oh, I want to be at the airport. Literally, like everybody kind of independently had to decide that, or call their neighbors or whatever.
Yeah.
There wasn't, you're right. There was no other way to do that. It was just a very impromptu thing. And I think it just shows what my point about how much it meant to the city, like how exciting.
Well, you couldn't get through the corridors. Like when you watch the video, you like there's just like, they had to like basically clear a path for the players to get out of the plane, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So pretty incredible. Just a great season, a great run. Man, and it just, like I said, it meant a lot to not only the city, but just having this franchise that just was so bad luck stricken for so many years, come in and win a championship. Just a great memory.
Yeah. I remember too, like when the people made up like little sayings like, oh, we deviled the Devils or something, you know, and yeah. Toppled the Capitals. I forget what it was, but I remember that too. Like there was just a lot of fun stuff that happened and good times. I mean, and like you're so young, you think it's going to happen every year, but then, you know, you realize, hey, wait a minute, this is kind of a special thing. It doesn't happen every year. So it makes you appreciate it more.
It does. Well, thank you everybody for listening. We so appreciate your continued support of our little show here. Please check us out on Facebook or Twitter. Please check out our website. Those links are in the show description. We always say word of mouth is a great way to
gets people to the airport at 3 a.m.
Yeah, it does. It does. It also gets people to listen to the podcast. So if you like this podcast, please tell your friends, and we will catch you next time.